Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and we're back this week to talk more Action Force. I want to appreciate everyone's patience as I recovered from the not very much non-COVID, but man, debilitating flu that's going around these days. I think it was technically that RSV thing they're talking about. We had a baby in our midst about a month earlier that my wife got. She believes she got it from the baby. Always blame the children, and then and then it spread throughout the house. So I think that's what it was. So I saw that there's vaccines or whatever on the market for it. Apparently, that RSV is a thing. So yeah, 2 weeks out, couldn't really get my breath, but back to it this week. I'm even trying to actually go to the gym and move around a little bit. My body's repelling, but it's repellent and it's also rebelling. It's both. It's repelling. It's climbing down the side of a building. That's what my body's doing. Also hit last week. We hit LA Comic-Con. Saw a bunch of people there. Met a bunch of new people, passed out a bunch of cards. So we've got some new listeners this week. Welcome aboard. Hopefully we get some great interviews out of it. Trying to set some stuff up for the future. Just met some cool people. Yeah, so we'll see. Hopefully some stuff comes from that. Listeners, you'll know first. You'll be the first to know if anything cool happens from that, but it was a great show. I tell you what I finally got. I finally got myself a, what are those? The G.I. Joe carry case from 83, 84. That square plastic thing looks kind of ugly, but is amazing. I've never had one. Never had one when I was a kid. Always wanted a nice one. I've seen them at some shows. They're usually a little broken. I got a very nice one for a really good price. Happy to see that. Also, I picked up, where did he go? Shoot. It's the, I put it in the other room. It's the Shadow Force, Ninja Force, Snake Eyes. He's on card still. The card's a little beat up, but it was a good price. I like things on cards. They're fun. I like the whole experience. It's definitely a version of Snake Eyes I never had. I was years away from when it came out from collecting it. So that was pretty cool. I'm happy to add him to my collection. Let's see what else. It was great. Yeah, it was great. We had a great show. Great show. LA Comic-Con. Always hit your local comic shows. And always be ready to find some good G.I. Joe stuff. There were a few, definitely more than a few dealers there with some good Joe stuff. That's pretty much all I picked up. Oh, I did finish my the most useless purchases of all. My Tales of G.I. Joe collection is completed. Where it's just the reprint of the original series. So now I've gotten like the first however many issues there are of that, 14 or something like that. I've got them in both the Tales of G.I. Joe form, the original form, the trade paperback form, the hardcover form, the digest form. Literally no reason for me to collect Tales of G.I. Joe, and yet I finally grabbed the last one at, not overpaying certainly, but, for a couple bucks. So that was pretty funny. As I'm buying it, I turned to a friend of the show and friend of mine, Jeremiah, and said, there is absolutely no reason for me to be buying this. So here's my $4. I'm going to purchase this to complete my collection. So that was fun. Also in the Joe world this week, Hawk, Helix, Ripper are in the house. Those arrived. I know a lot of you are the HISS tanks are starting to ship. And so I haven't seen mine yet. But I know they're starting to ship, and I think I just got an authorization from Hasbro that the Transformers G.I. Joe Thunder Machine Soundwave collaboration is about to ship, so that's very exciting. That looks really, really great, and I can't wait to check that out. And then if you're listening to this right now, like on the December 6th, when this episode drops, Renegade Games, they're running some holiday sales. So if you want to get in on the G.I. Joe RPG, I know that was on sale yesterday. It might still be today, something like 20% off in stock books, but just check them out because the Renegade's making cool stuff. I still have not really gotten into the tabletop RPG stuff. I have the books. It's going to be a lot for me to get into that. I'm going to be honest, but I have them. However, there are other games, the Mission Critical and the deck builder game. I forget what they call that exactly, but the deck builder game is those are fun. Those are a lot of fun. So if they're doing a good job with those, I'm very happy with them. So, with that, the only thing left to say is, thanks for listening, guys, gals, friends of the show, listeners. We appreciate you coming out every week and giving me your ears. I appreciate you saying hi on social media. It's on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find me at JoeOnJoePod. You can send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. I know there's a couple of you out there that we talked about getting some interviews together. Now that I'm feeling better, I will be reaching out to you if you hear this. And, and if I don't, that's simply because I've lost track of things because life's crazy. So please hit me up. But either way, hit me up. If you want to say hi, if you want to be a guest on the show, if there's something specific you want me to cover, I'm always up for suggestions. Like I said, this week we're going to do more Action Force, and we'll be doing more Action Force next week as well. This is the Battle Action Force Annual 1987. We stalled there about 3-4 weeks ago now because we had that great Word Burglar interview. So, and while you're on the internet, if you want to help support the show, you can go to patreon.com/JoeandJoePod and sign up to be a Patreon. That helps keep the show afloat and is very much appreciated. I'm in the middle of reorganizing a bit of it. There is, they've introduced what do they call, lists or groups or something like that. So instead of using keywords to search for the episode, you can use these groups. So I've started putting them together. I need to revisit that and fix those. So if you're listening and you're Patreon and you're trying to find which episodes are where, hopefully that'll be very simple these days, or at least simpler, because previously it was just all by keyword, and now there'll be like lists and things like that. So work in progress. Hope to get that done by the end of the year. And while you're on the internet, you need to check out our sponsors, the Movies in a Meal podcast. In the beginning of time, the smallest organism gained sentience and thought to itself, I really need a good meal. Then, a bunch of other stuff happened, and finally the Lumiere brothers started showing movies in France. This was all the inspiration that fellow broadcasters Brad, Keith, and Ben needed to combine these two primal needs into the Movies in a Meal podcast. The Movies in a Meal is one of the most casual and relaxing film talk podcasts you could ever listen to. These three friends enjoy a good meal together while talking all about the movies. And not just reviews, they do favorite lists, comparison discussions, genre talks, anything and everything that you can think of. They've even broken their solemn promise inherent in the name and branched out into TV talk. So I love the variety of films they bring to the table. They cover new releases, classics, cult films, often in one episode. It's really a delight to listen to, and it has something for every movie fan out there to enjoy. So if you're looking to grow your podcast library, if you eat meals, and if you've ever seen a movie, then you should give Ben, Keith, and Brad a listen and subscribe to the Movies in a Meal podcast. They've been a great sponsor to this show. I love the Movies in a Meal podcast, and I'd like all of you to love them too. All right, this week we are back with the Action Force 1987 Annual, and this week's episode or story within it is all about Storm Shadow. So very much like they had that Snake Eyes solo effort, this is a Storm Shadow solo effort. And I gotta say, it's pretty well done. He is an assassin to be feared. To start with, that is what he is. That is what he is up to. And it's pretty great. It's drawn by the John Cooper, who's done some of these previously. And I know that not from any credit boxes. He signed his work, so good for you, John. I appreciate you signing your work. I like his art. It's got that great, it's on page 89 of the annual. It's got that great Cobra logo, that European Cobra logo, where it's the snake coiled around like an oval with the word Cobra in the middle. That reminds me, was that the old like Hasbro style? There was an old toy brand that had that kind of logo, but instead of the toy brand, it says Cobra. And it's just called Storm Shadow. That's the name of it. But if you look at the front, do they give it a different name? No, in the front they just call it Storm Shadow. So the name of the the name of the story is the name of the character. Now, John Cooper's work I like a lot. They've chosen to draw Storm Shadow a little bit differently. Some notable differences. This story, much like the Snake Eyes one, it's a duo color, so it's 2-color story. It's primarily orange with shades of orange and a lot of pen hatching. So it's heavily rendered, lots of spotted blacks and then orange highlights. So coloring wise, you can always give or take, what's actually supposed to be colored. It's more of a choice to highlight something. Having said that, they pretty much exclusively make Storm Shadow's mask orange. The Cobra insignia is orange and his pants are orange. So within that, limited actual color scale, you're also dealing with, they're making the choice that he's wearing, I'm assuming, this is the way I'm translating it, that his outfit does have those different colors. So even if this were in like fully rendered colored, he would have a colored mask, colored pants, and a white shirt. I'm going to assume. That's interesting. I think it looks really cool in this orange. I would wonder what it would look like in if they did a fully rendered color one. And I imagine they probably did one in the weekly, but we're not looking at that right now, so it's all speculation. So picture Storm Shadow with an orange mask, orange pants, white top, white boots, like wrappings boots. He also has it's like a baseball jersey style shirt, like a jersey shirt, where his well, are they still? They're saying those are wrappings. I take that back. It's funny because it's the muted orange, but it looks flesh colored. But when you look at some of the actual rendering, you can see that he's doing wrappings around it. But because it's flesh colored, it looks like his forearms are showing. So that's why I was thrown off for a minute there. So that's kind of funny that he looks like he's ready for a baseball game, but it's really his it's wrapping. So it's a pretty accurate costume. It's just that the decisions to block the color make it look pretty unique, and it's kind of neat. He's got a sword, he's got his bow and arrow, etc., so on and so forth. Yeah. So first page, he's on the dingy side street near the center of Paris. There is a scared man walking around. He feels like he's being followed. He's got his hands in his pocket. He looks pretty disheveled, got to be honest. And suddenly a drunk lurches out of a doorway into the man's path, but he's unconcerned because there's dozens of men like him on the streets of the French capital. There's dozens of drunkards. Are they taking a shot at the French? That there's a lot of drunks on the streets of Paris? I feel like that's a shot. Good job. Way to go. Not John Cooper, he drew it, but whoever wrote it. And it's the man in the wino is asking for a few francs, and he's told to get out of his way. But Storm Shadow will not get out of his way because it is Storm Shadow as the stumbling drunk, and if you won't give me your money, I'll have to take your life instead. Now he does that thing where you absolutely get it a lot in comic books, but I feel like you don't get it in a lot of movies that aren't also interested in the person revealing themselves at the moment, like to the world. But in like, if you were trying to just assassinate someone in the movie, he would have stayed a bum and murdered him. But instead, Storm Shadow does the thing where he rips the coat off first, so he reveals himself to us first. To go, oh my God, it's Storm Shadow. And we turn the page, and sure enough, he swipes across the guy's chest, and he says, "Die, traitor." The ninja assassin searches the body quickly for what he was looking for, an address on a box of matches, and it gives a address of a hotel. There's a pistol laying on the ground. We don't really know why this guy was a traitor, but as this happens, a police officer, a gendarme, which I've seen that word before, but I don't speak French, so gendarme, I believe that is correct. A nosy gendarme. Mon Dieu, what is happening here? And this again is because he's revealed himself as Storm Shadow. Now the cop just sees Storm Shadow instead of a crazy, homeless person who might have stabbed another crazy homeless person. But Storm Shadow silences him with the throwing star, and he hides their bodies in like trash which really is painting a picture of the streets of Paris. Paris in the mid 80s, according to the writers of Action Force, was just a place to get murdered and never found. So Storm Shadow makes his way back to Cobra Commander, and Commander says, he reveals a little bit what we're up to. He says, my spies, and remember, it's the spies, inform me there's an assassination squad here in Paris to kill me. It consists of former Red Shadows led by the Black Major. So now we're tying into that heavily. The predecessor to G.I. Joe continuity for Action Force, where there were the Red Shadows and Black Major and all that stuff. So that's kind of neat. If you don't know that, like I don't, go to bloodforthebaron.com. That was the website we've been talking about for a little bit. It's great. It's a really great resource for all this Action Force tomfoolery and behind the scenes stuff, and actual continuity stories in front of the scenes and all those kinds of things. So that'll catch you up on a lot of this, who these people are and all that stuff. I still need to read through more and kind of get a grip on it. But anyway, so Cobra Commander, he's sitting on a pretty cool Cobra dais, or what are those called? Throne, that would be the word. And Storm Shadow asks how he can serve. We go to the next page. And he says, by killing them instead, you're the only one I can trust. So he sends Storm Shadow out into the Paris night. I'm assuming they're still in Paris. Doesn't really say that they've left Paris, but sends them out to get all the other assassins. Here in Paris. He says here in Paris. Yeah. So one of the assassins is dead, but 7 more still remain alive, including the Black Major himself, which would be the most difficult to dispose of. So it was at this point in the story where I was reading it, where I was reminded, it's been a couple weeks since they did this, that so much of the style of these stories, and it's John Cooper drawing it, so I'll say it's John Cooper's style. There's so many panels are mid shot panels. There's not a lot of variety in that. It's not terrible, but I think it gives a sense of this happens and that happens and that happens and that happens and that happens, versus with a very steady pace, right? Versus a little more variation in depth, dimension, camera angle, not necessarily even camera angle, because he does some cool stuff. He does some up tilts, and he does he puts cameras behind things. More of I guess depth and like distance from the camera to show us a little more of the world. So like in this one, you see him jumping over rooftops, and that's cool, and we absolutely get that he's jumping over rooftops, but we don't really know where. Like I said, they're in Paris, and as cliched as it is, we have yet to see the Eiffel Tower. But I do think that comes in later, though, doesn't it? Yeah, no, never see the Eiffel Tower, actually. And then in this next panel, he's overlooking the hotel from that book of matches he found, and it's certainly passable and it's fine, but there's no sense of big there. It's kind of a mid shot on Storm Shadow, and in the distance is this hotel. Versus, instead of having Storm Shadow in every scene or the focus of every scene, one of these panels could be the city itself. With Storm Shadow just showing us where Storm Shadow is in relation to it. I hope that makes sense. It's certainly not knocking any of the rendering. I think it looks great. He's got a nice hatch style. It's not overly done. It's perfectly suited for this type of duotone printing. So I think that's great. I think his action's fun. His form is great, but it really is we'll say the cinematography of it that we saw in some of these other Action Force books that I think still is in play here, where it's all very much the same distance from the camera. And so that doesn't give me a sense of a change. It doesn't give me a change of pace per se. It just gives me a pace. So I just go ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. I hope that makes sense. I hope it doesn't sound overly critical, because I don't mean it to be. It's And again, I wonder if that was, maybe some of the style of the English comics at the time. I am certainly not enough of an expert in that to tell you that. I just do know that it does play out differently from the way American comics were being made at the time. So Storm Shadow goes in there, and there's an old man at the reception, and Storm Shadow threatens him at knife point. A group of 7 foreigners, what room are they in? He gives them the room number, and then Storm Shadow kills him. That is a gangster move. This old dude who's just running his hotel absolutely gives Storm Shadow the news he needs, and Storm Shadow straight up kills him. This, I gotta say, is the Storm Shadow I prefer. I don't like the Storm Shadow that works with the Joes, that is kind and blah, blah, blah. And I know we learned early on in Storm Shadow's existence, he was around for maybe a year before we learned that he, didn't really kill his uncle and that he does kind of have honor. I get that. But the Storm Shadow that I primarily grew up with, while on the cartoon, and certainly wasn't killing people on the cartoon, he was just a bad guy. So for me, in my brain, in my lizard brain, as much as I love the Storm Shadow in the comic book, and I love the convoluted and oftentimes convoluted and intricate backstory of his betrayal and downfall, the Storm Shadow that I always dug was a bad guy, just was a bad guy. He may have had his reasons. He may have been noble. He may have had more honor than other people. But at the end of the day, he was still a bad guy. This is the Storm Shadow that speaks to me. Speaking of Storm Shadow, hopefully we can get him on the show. But I happened to meet Keone Young at the Los Angeles Comic Convention. So that was a really exciting thing. And I'm going to, I hope he reaches out. I'd love to have him on the show. So yeah, can't talk all the Storm Shadow without speaking him. But his is the voice of Storm Shadow that I think about. His style of that animated style of Storm Shadow, where he was just a bad guy with honor, but it's still a bad guy. That's it, and that's what's happening here. Storm Shadow kills this guy. One of the assassins happens to be getting out of the elevator at the same time, and so before he tries to escape, he yells, "You won't get me, ninja!" And the Storm Shadow throws his sword across the room in a very cool move. It kills the guy. It kills him technically on screen, but the doors have closed so we don't see it, which is neat. It's a really neat way to get around being overtly violent, like showing us, like in the other one when Storm Shadow cut the guy down, it was all off screen or the guy's body was blocking it. In this case, it's clear that that sword impaled the guy in the chest, but the doors have closed, so we get to see it. We don't flinch away from it. I really like that choice. He smashes the controls. Now, this is also one of the things that I've noticed in these two, is that they're very literal with the dialogue sometimes. Instead of letting the picture tell the story, they, Storm Shadow busts the controls for the elevator. And he says, "With these controls smashed, no one else will use that lift tonight." I feel like an American English version of that would be showing the same panel, Storm Shadow busting the controls, and someone just saying something along the lines of like "out of order" or lift, like this will cut off an escape route, something like that. Not as literal as "with these controls smashed, no one else will use that lift," like explaining what you're seeing as well as the effects of it. Like American comics, to my mind, would use the visual and then explain why that visual is important. In this case, they're doing both in both. They're doing both in the caption, and then they're showing you the visual. They're not letting the visual tell part of the caption. Again, hope that makes sense. So that was something else I noticed too, and have noticed throughout this. There's a lot where the dialogue is double upping what's happening in the screen, and that actually is something that I think is a little bit of an old DC thing. I feel like DC used to do a lot of this. Marvel didn't do a lot of it, I'm sure they did their share. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sugarcoating it, but like it's an older trait that I think Marvel or DC held on to longer than Marvel. And by this time in 87 in Marvel, I feel like they had moved on a little bit from that old school dialogue telling everything in the image manner. And DC certainly had moved on to this time. But this, when I see that dialogue, it makes me feel like 70s DC, 60s Marvel, you know? Like, because DC's usually about a decade behind them. At least, you know, in the past. I'm not talking about modern stuff. That's a whole different animal. So anyway, so the next panel, again, a little bit of that. He says, my next stop will be the roof. From there, it'll be easy to get into the assassin's room. And then the next panel, we have a big sign that says to the roof. And Storm Shadow saying, this leads to the outside. But my ninja blood tells me to be careful. I sense that someone is close by. Cut out that this leads to the outside part. There's a sign already that says to the roof. So Storm Shadow could just be saying, my ninja blood tells me to be careful, because we know he's heading to the roof based on this sign and the previous panel that said I'm heading to the roof. Anyway, cut to the next one. We got there's an assassin on the rooftop, and he's got a gun out, but he said the reason his gun is out, and he says, and this is nice. He says the door's opening, and the Black Major said I wasn't to allow anyone out on the roof, so I can blow away whoever it is without hesitation. This would be where I would have expected them to say, so I'm going to hold him to say something along the lines of, so I've got my gun out to stop anyone, but they don't. The picture shows you that he's ready for action, and the dialogue tells you why. So I do like that, and that's an example of what I'm saying from the previous page. So he shoots up the door. Now there is a muffled yarg that comes from the door, so that means Storm Shadow made fake noises, because he certainly is not hit by this machine gun. So Storm Shadow purposely went yarg, which makes me laugh. The guy pops in the door. There's no one there. Storm Shadow's hiding above the door. That classic move. I like these camera angles. The camera goes low. The guy is getting knocked into us. The gun is also falling in front of it. That's a really cool perspective. The guy falls down the stairs. I'm assuming broke his neck based on the lethality of Storm Shadow's other attacks. And he realizes they're in room 27, which should be directly below him. Remember, he's on the roof. Go to the next page, and there is a guy. It's a guy who's trying to talk to Frank. He says, hey, Frank, do you want some more coffee? And then as Storm Shadow shoots him with an arrow, his response is, hey, you're not Frank. And his coffee spills. That's a great 2-panel setup. As he's getting hit with an arrow in his chest. You're not Frank. I love it. So these panels actually bring to mind, and a lot of this brings to mind the ways of with hatching. When you do because it's pretty much doesn't need coloring. It could be pretty much told in black and white, ink, like pen rendering, of how important it is to not get overly complicated with your hatching. And here's a prime example. So the wall on the building is specifically hatched up and down with a little bit of a I guess a 79 degree, 80 degree angle, something like that. So the walls are going up and down. Then the sky, which also has hatching on it, which could easily be cluttered and muttered, is going at almost a 90 degree angle. It's like literally like you're making like a wall meet a floor, except the floor in this case is the sky. And that's going at a 90 degree angle the other direction. But there's no crossover. And then above the action where you're looking at is more hatching that actually matches the direction, or it's a little off, but it matches close to the direction of the wall hatch. And in between those two, the lighter area, or it's a crosshatch above it. So in the lighter area in between, that's where Storm Shadow lived. And up front in the camera with very little hatch work on it is the guy getting shot with the arrow. So the guy getting shot with the arrow just has delineating lines, really. Then the wall hatching, then the light hatching on the background, and an almost unhatched Storm Shadow. So he's drawn clearly like the victim, and then darker hatching in the back. And so there's these layers, these steps and depth of field here that really helps keep a frame that could easily get convoluted simply because, again, because you're dealing strictly in, for the most part, it's black and white. The color 100% does help. Like, it helps define the shutters on the windows. That really helps. And the shutters are colored, but the window itself is not. So there's some very smart design choices on these pages. Like, these look really cool. They look really cool. So even though he shoots him with a quiet arrow, they did hear him go, "Arg." So that was Morgan. We learned in this panel that was Morgan. And Black Major tells a guy to go check out the balcony. I wonder if this guy is Frank. So Morgan's dead. They know Storm Shadow did it. Their cover's been blown. They got to get out of there. And Storm Shadow's plan is to get them to panic and get them while they escape. So all these assassins grab as much gear as possible. Storm Shadow climbs down the side of a building. Now, on to the next page. 90 seconds later, that is a quick getaway on their part. And they're all jumping in this car. The car is drawn with the steering wheel on the right, which is correct for the time, for the place. Get out of the way, Frenchmen. We are in a hurry. Sacre bleu, you are madmen. And this is where we get John Cooper signing his work. So I'm very glad he did it. Nice work, John. There's also, we learned that one of these guys' name is Hennessy, which is, I think that, yeah, that's a, there was a movie, Hennessy, they talked about on Tarantino's podcast. I can't remember if I watched it or if I wanted to watch it. Anyway, they all jump in this car and make a getaway. And there he is, standing in the middle of the street. They said, someone ahead of us in the road, the ninja. So they try to run him down. And of course, he jumps to the side and he slices their wheel, destroys one of their front tires. Tires, by the way, spelled Tyres. I did not know that the British spelt tires with a Y. That is something. I've played, what is it, Rule Born? Millsborn. I've played that game that's like kind of like Uno, but it's about racing and stuff. I don't recall them spelling tires with a Y, but here it is, tires with a Y. So we go to the next page. The car's out of control, blown tire. Hennessy can't swerve in time. Hennessy crashes into an oncoming traffic. It's a huge car accident. The others are done for, Major, and I'm badly hurt. We also learned that there's Clark. So Clark, Hennessy, Frank, and Morgan. They're all dead. The only survivor here is the Black Major. He says it's every man for himself, and as the car explodes, an arrow whizzes overhead. He says, this time you failed to hit the target, Storm Shadow, and he makes his getaway. Now, Storm Shadow ends it with, the distant sound of approaching police sirens begin to grow louder. The ninja knew it was time to leave. He says, yes, Black Major, you've dodged death, but your plot to assassinate Cobra Commander is in ruins. My mission is completed. You live to die another day. First of all, perhaps, was there a young member of the Broccoli family who read this and said, Die Another Day would be a fabulous name for a James Bond movie? Not a great James Bond movie, but a fabulous name for a James Bond movie? I don't know. But there it is in print in England. When the Broccoli children who currently run Eon, and did run Eon when Die Another Day was out, did they see this? Did they get inspiration from this? I don't know. I'm going to say yes. But this also ends because everything has to end. But it always ends with, and so many episodes of G.I. Joe ended with this, where the bad guy's getting away, and he's like right there. Like you've chased this bad guy all over the world. You've chased him all over the city of Paris. You've chased him everywhere. You've killed 6 of these assassins, Storm Shadow. And you now, just because there's some cop sirens, which, by the way, if you chase him, you will no longer be in the vicinity of the cop sirens. You will be running after this guy down the streets of Paris. Why do you stop running after the Baron in this case? I'll never understand that. I understand it from a storytelling expediency, because they're making a half-hour cartoon and they have to end it. So they go, all right, Cobra got away. Even though we know, like, Cobra Commander's flying away on a single solitary fang across the Gulf of Mexico. We could easily jump into, a dragonfly and catch him. But let him go. He'll get away for another day. I will never reconcile that. There's something charming about it, certainly. But there is something in my heart of hearts that goes, Storm Shadow, what are you doing? Anyway, I loved it. It's great. I think it looks really nice. I do, it's the storytelling. When I talk about like the dimension and kind of the cinematography, I'll just call it the cinematography of it. That's more of a observation of the choices that they make, and maybe I wonder if that was more of the style of the time. Not necessarily saying that what they give us looks bad in any way, shape, or form. It just the result of it is more of a steady drumbeat instead of a there's no ups and downs visually for me. But I dig it, man. There's one more G.I. Joe story in this for next week. It's all the way at the end. What was it called? It was called no, there it is, Operation Liberty. Looks like we've got Zartan in the mix, Cobra Commander in the mix. I don't know who else. Ricondo shows up. Is that Torpedo maybe? Destro? It's going to be fun. So join us next week for part 3 and the final part of Battle Action Force Annual 1987. I really appreciate all of you listeners. And now you, Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.